Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Rome Business Radio. My name is Roger Manus, and this is the Hardy Realty Show. We are broadcasting from the Hardy Realty Studios, and we work in cooperation with the Rome News Tribune. And we are joined today on the Hardy Realty Show by Jimmy Byers of Hardy Realty and Devon Smyth of the Davies Shelter. Hello, how are you?
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm just hunky-dory, as we say down south. We're social distancing. We're conducting this podcast via Zoom. So you might hear different audio sources, but that's okay. We're used to that in this day and age. And I always thank Jimmy. Hardy Realty uses their podcast to talk about the good things going on in the Rome Floyd County area. So thanks to Jimmy and Hardy Realty for doing that. Devon, you are the executive director at the Davies Shelter. Is that correct? Can you tell us a little bit about what the Davies Shelter does every day to help people in our community?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me all today. I really appreciate it. The Davies Shelters have been in Rome since 2003 and have been providing transitional housing primarily to men over the course of the history of the agency. But a little over a year ago in August, we opened our women's shelter up on North Broad. And so now we have a shelter for 16 men and 12 women, 4 of whom are mothers with children. So we're able to shelter individual men, individual women, and mothers with children.
Well, it's and the farm program is yes. You got a lot going on. Talk about that if you don't mind.
Sure. So we have we had a really robust gardening program when I got back. We have a relationship with Berry College, and Dr. Brian Campbell was instrumental in getting a garden set up and providing food for our guests over on our East 19th Street property, which just is adjacent to the men's shelter. We doubled that a couple of years ago, and we're growing enough food that St. Mary's School gave us a bus, and we retrofitted that into a mobile farmers market. I guess this is our second season that we've had that, so a little over 2 years ago. The Creative Technologies program at Berry College, Hackberry, retrofitted the bus. And so we take out the Davies Farm Bus and sell produce around the community using a food justice model in areas of town where they're considered food deserts. So there's a definition: if you're a certain distance away from a grocery store, you're considered in a food desert, where you would primarily buy your food at a convenience store. So we go into those neighborhoods and we take fresh food. So then I guess about a little over a year ago now, maybe almost 2 as well, the city of Rome gave us the use of a 2-acre piece of land over off of South Broad. And we've been growing vegetables out there. Now, this year we had 98 tomato plants and all kinds of greens. And so we've been able to take that to market, both in Atlanta and then 2 farmers markets here in town. And so our guests can work in that program. So they're giving back to the Rome community in the ways that they're helping with the farm or the gardens, or we're selling the food, taking it out to people who are food insecure. And so it's providing a good bit of service around Rome. And I think the question that really always comes up is people wonder why a homeless shelter has a farming program. But if we are able to eliminate one of those pieces of concern, food on your table, roof over your head, being able to pay your utilities, if we can chip away at one of those things, food insecurity, then you may not become homeless. It might create some stability in your home around food. So we're really excited. We just got 2 grants from the federal government that will allow us to expand both the farm bus and our farming program, which will hire 10 of our guests a year on a short-term contract basis. So they'll get some work experience, make some money, and it, again, gives back into the program we have.
Well, Jimmy, what prompted you to have Devon on as a guest this month?
Well, I guess 2 reasons. One is we've always been a supporter of the Davies Shelter. I was on the board many years ago as they were planning their new location on East 12th. Is that right?
18th. It's over right around the corner.
18th,
Yeah.
18th, right. That's right. But in helping raise money for that. And so and we try to give annually. We try to encourage our agents to give. We'll do small bits and pieces. So from that standpoint, but from the other reason is just especially during this pandemic is I was just curious as how all of this is affecting and what the needs are, and if we can get those needs out to the public, maybe they can jump in and help Devon with the needs we see. I know I'll be curious about to realize the statistics on the homeless data that we have in Rome, and that I know where our office building is on Martha Berry, we have a lot of traffic that we feel like that are homeless. So I just they do such a great job, and Bill Davies has been a friend forever, and so I just thought it'd be a great thing to have her on to tell us, especially this time of this 2020 pandemic.
Which feels like it's been 5 years,
yes,
right?
Yes, it does feel like it's been 5 years.
We've been at this at least 5 years, probably.
Yeah.
So addressing what his questions were there, Devon, can you go into that a little bit?
Sure. So we have run both of our shelters, and I would like to say with just amazing staff. We have had protocols in both our men's and women's shelter, and we've not had any active cases of COVID, which I'm stunned, honestly, with the sheer number of the population and the way that we're moving in and out. We feel really good about that. And then with the help of the United Way and Salvation Army and Hospitality House, we had an emergency shelter here from early April till mid-May that housed another, I think it was right at 43. I think 43 is a number right now, off the top of my head, people who were unsheltered. So it's really hard to say to people, shelter in place, and then you don't have somewhere to shelter in place. And so all of us worked together, all those agencies, and then Dr. John Cowan donated the space up on Kingston Road, and we were able to provide shelter to that extra part of the community that we just didn't have room in our regular shelters to house. So huge financial outlay. We sheltered in place until a couple of weeks ago when the governor lifted the orders for shelters, and so that means we ran staff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at both of our spaces.
Wow.
And that's significant. We didn't budget for that. We weren't when we set our budget last year, we didn't anticipate close to 6 months of staffing that way. So that's a distinct financial outlay that we had not bargained on. I will say,
is it full? When you staffed all this, has it been pretty much full the whole time?
Yes, sir.
Are you full today?
Right now at the women's shelter, we have 2 family rooms, one of which we're keeping as a quarantine room, just in case. If we had somebody come down sick, we want to be able to isolate. And then at the men's shelter, we are at 12 right now. Over there out of the 16. So, yeah. And we're requiring guests to come with a negative COVID test in the last 72 hours. You're only negative right when you get the test, but we figure waiting on the results, that gives people a chance to get in.
Right.
What are I hate to kind of get deep into numbers. What is the statistical data for homelessness in Rome, Floyd County? What are the numbers really like?
Sure. So, every other year in odd years, so in 19, we did the first point in time count for our county in 10 years. We administered it. It's a federally mandated count that HUD asks the states to administer, and then the Department of Community Affairs asks individual counties to do that count. And it just hadn't been done here in 10 years. So when I got back in 17, I got here 2 weeks before the count, and we couldn't get it all organized the way we needed to. So in 19, we jumped in and said we would be the folks to organize it. And we reported 183 people as homeless. The state did an audit on that and came back. I think they came back with about 140. And I'm not sure what their criteria was, but I do know that in that 10-year gap, there was a predictive model used. So if you don't have a count, the state says, oh, well, based on population and based on trends around the state, this community, this county probably only has this many people. And they had predicted that we had 52 people homeless. And I think, Jimmy, you could probably speak to that, being where you are, that 52 might be a little low. We knew that was low. So we went back. So we say anywhere from 180 to 200 people we expect are unsheltered on a given night in our community. And we'll do that count again in January, and we'll have a better sense to compare to 2 years ago, and we'll continue to help administer that moving forward.
So part of your mission, part of your goal is to help transition through the shelters. So
yes.
What are some of the root causes of homelessness? Unemployment, sure. Things that the shelter can help overcome, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the base kind of root causes is a lack of affordable housing. We don't have a huge stock of places for people to move into that are affordable. It's always a chicken and egg question. Did mental health precipitate homelessness, or did homelessness precipitate a mental health crisis? So we have a 90-day stay with our guest. When they come in, we begin looking at some of those root causes. Is there a mental health need that's been unmet that we can help connect you to services? And then from that point, has there also been substance misuse? Because oftentimes if you've not had medication, you've misused substances. And so we work also in that arena. And one of the things that I think we do really deftly is we connect people to the services out in our community. We have a network of other agencies that are doing excellent work that we do not need to duplicate. And so we count on them. Elevation House has a mental health clubhouse. Highland Rivers provides assessment and medication and counseling. Living Proof Recovery provides peer-based recovery meetings. I think right now they're at 21 offerings 7 days a week. So we're constantly looking at what the need is that a guest presents with, and then connecting the dots between what they might have need for. So once we do that and kind of get those baseline issues dealt with, then, and sometimes at the same time, we're looking at where can you go to work? Where can you start making some money to set aside in that 3 months? We know it costs about $1,200 a month to live. That's a pretty modest estimation, but that's a typical, to rent a place and pay your utilities. And so we're encouraging our guests to have that kind of a nest egg, at least a month or so of that as they are leaving us, so that they can move on into a place and not have to be anxious about where the next rent check's going to come from. And we connect with Georgia Northwestern, Serve Safe, and forklift training, because those kind of jobs and those kind of accreditations or technical skills allow you to make a little more money than just minimum wage as well.
Right. So the desire to transition and help people get back on their feet is that's just a key component.
Absolutely.
That's the absolute goal. But if you do find there's a mental health issue or a substance issue, then what are next steps there?
We require, if there has been substance misuse, we require 90 meetings in 90 days. It's an AANA model. It's not perfect, but it definitely is a way to help support and help individuals create community, because, oftentimes homelessness has removed community. You being isolated and not housed, if you've had substance misuse and mental health needs that haven't been met, you're isolated. And so that is also part of what we're hoping for, is to create community that would support people moving forward. So that, they may be going to a meeting, they may be going to work, and they may be also heading to Highland Rivers once a week, and all that happens at the same, in a given day. That can be part of we call it purposeful work. You leave out during the day and you're at something purposeful during the day.
Right. Jimmy, I would imagine part of the importance of supporting the shelter comes from the Rome corporate community, of which Hardy Realty, of course, has a high profile. I guess maybe this is a question for Devon and Jimmy, since Jimmy is a former board member. He said, what kind of support do you get from businesses around our area?
Jimmy,
I'll let Devon answer that. I mean, I know that, Bill Davies never passes up an opportunity to ask for money. So
that's right.
It was well supported when, they were able to raise money to build that building. Barely, I wouldn't say easily, but it was not a terrible challenge. So,
yes,
Devon can answer that. I hadn't been on the board in 5 or 6 years, so.
Well, this is where
it might be time for you to come back.
Well, the one thing I liked about your board was that you rotated folks off, which I think is important. Now, y'all may not be doing that anymore, but I think that was there's sort of a term limit, and so you got fresh faces, fresh ideas, and fresh energy. Anyway.
Well, plus I lose track of how many boards Jimmy has been on.
Well,
I bet there's a nice list somewhere somebody's got.
Well, Jimmy, he's just very, very active, supportive guy in our community. But Devon, back to the original question, your corporate support and how critical it is, and sure. let's use the podcast to get some more.
Absolutely. Well, we are so grateful. Southeastern Mills, Kellogg, larger corporate kind of entities here in our community have International Paper, lots and lots of that kind of help. And then our hometown offices as well to say, what could we do this month to help? So we've had Garner and Glover does a food drive every year, canned food drive, and then they bring it to both of the shelters, and then we stock the pantries, and we don't have to worry about those sorts of things. So obviously, I think Bill Davies would be the first person to tell you that money is the perfect size and fits all of us well. They don't items are great, but money always goes in very distinctly different ways. We have a running wish list, and I always help people understand that anything you need to run your household, we need times 16 or times 12 plus children. So if you're buying toilet paper, throw an extra package in your buggy when you're at the store and drop it off at one of our shelters. We use bleach and floor cleaner and Windex, dish pods, laundry soap, any of those kinds of items we like to keep on hand and like to have a good stock so we can keep the shelters running.
Well, it's interesting. I'm sure it's an uphill climb all the time, needing more resources and needing more volunteers and beds and things like that. But the addition of the women's shelter a few years ago, the fact is there's growth. You're being able to provide more beds. So just talk about the growth, if you could, over the last couple of decades of the program.
Sure. So the program originally was down on South Broad in a really lovely home down there. And for a minute, there was a women's shelter right behind it that was part of the Davies shelter, but it didn't stay open long. And there were a number of reasons for that. But when I got back, I honestly had come back to town in 2017 to run a men's shelter. That was it. I had no ambition to open up another shelter or start a farm. That was not the plan or the map. But we very quickly started getting calls at the shelter asking for beds for women. And so we just started tracking those numbers and had Salvation Army and Hospitality House help us as well, because Salvation Army houses 4 single women. Hospitality House is obviously housing women and children. They have 28 spaces there. And we just knew there were so many folks that were looking for shelter. And a few years ago, my phone always is on at night in case the staff needs me across my room with a ringer. And a phone call came in about 2 a.m, and it was a woman, and she said, "Do you all have a bed?" And at this point, we only had the men's shelter, and a lot of women call for their fathers or their uncles or their brothers. And so I said, well, when I left at 5:30, we didn't have a bed, but let me give you the number there and call over and ask the staff if there's a bed. And she paused and said, well, would you have room for my children as well? And what went from being just a really rhetorical conversation suddenly became, how do I find a place for this woman at 2:15 in the morning, and her children as well. And the reality was there wasn't anywhere to put her. There wasn't any space in town. There weren't issues of domestic violence. There weren't issues of addiction. It was strictly she had moved here, had no family, had lost a job, had subsequently lost housing. And so the last thing she had was her car and her children and their belongings in the car. And so we talked for a while, and she was crying by the end of the conversation, apologizing to me for bothering me. And I was crying and apologizing to her because we didn't have a solution that was right. And so we landed on her heading to the Chick-fil-A parking lot because it has good halogen lights, and I knew the staff would get there about 5 a.m. And I asked her to cover herself and her children with blankets in the back seat of the car to be safe. And then I stayed up the rest of the night, and I was pretty heartbroken and prayerful and tearful that night. And I called Bill Davies at about 7. I waited almost till 7 o'clock, and I just said, Bill, we're going to open a women's shelter. I don't know how we do it. I don't know what it looks like, but we can't keep having these kind of conversations, and especially telling people there's nowhere to go. And so that was the impetus for us doing it. And so the growth really came out of that, and it came out of us having those kind of honest conversations here in Rome, saying there's a need. It's greater than we really had imagined, and how do we meet that need? And so we've grown. I think right now we're finding our feet underneath us in the middle of this pandemic and providing what we need to day to day at this point. But even in the midst of that, there's always this, what do we do better? How do we better serve our guests? How do we better equip our guests? And then how do we move them out back into our Rome Floyd community and say, now you're part of us in a different way.
Well, it's one of the things in my notes here, Devon, I was going to say, can you please give me a specific story that will break my heart? And you just did.
Yeah.
What happened to this woman and her children? Do we know?
We have no idea. I tried to reach her the next day. I never was able to get back to her.
Yeah. But now that became the impetus for, the push for the housing for, the shelter for women and children. So, wow. Anyway, and I'm sure you deal with that all day, every day, variety of circumstance. So now I've lost my train of thought.
I've got a question. How do you get your clients? I mean, your guests. Is there? I'm sure that local agencies refer things in, but is there ever sort of an outreach into those that are homeless that don't seem to want to do anything but be homeless?
Sure.
Which is a sort of a different guest than y'all sometimes deal with. I didn't know.
Yeah. So last year, I think around all the homeless resolutions that came through the city commission, a lot of conversation and energy began happening around what do we do as a community? We know there are camps. Right. We know there are people in those camps that are not being served. So the farm bus became a utility for us to use because, once growing season's over, we're not taking vegetables out. So it was parked at the shelter, and we loaded it up with coats and gloves and hats and comfort packs that included snacks and bar soap and deodorant, things you might need. Right. And then we went out specifically to those camps. We identified where they were around the community, and on Monday mornings, we would take a big pot of coffee and pastries and just began doing outreach in a much more intentional way to say, we're here when you're ready. Right. It may or may not happen, but just know that we're available. And so that out of that effort, we the Hope Alliance was born, which is a group of, and it's not a nonprofit. We're just an alliance of nonprofits working together. So Hospitality House, Elevation House, Living Proof, Salvation Army, Merlene Justice with Reach Ministries. So we all started going out and just providing. We provide, like Davies Shelter had coffee, and then somebody was providing sugar and creamer, and so we were all going out together a couple times a week. First thing in the morning when it was cold. What we know about camps is there's a lot of unmet mental health needs in those spaces.
Right.
It's really hard to choose to come into shelter if you're not stable in that regard. And so hopefully building credibility with people who are unsheltered like that, at least may open a door at some point. That's my prayer always, is that somebody might say they were.
You bring up a point that I never thought about. Of course, I didn't realize that you were doing with the buses and that, but by reaching out to them, you are trying to meet them where they are and see if there's opportunity for them to want to take that next step to get into a shelter, but knowing that they've got to meet some criteria to get out of the shelter. So, I mean, I hate to use the word recruiting, but you're trying to get them, meet them at their spot so that they can see the needs and begin to trust what you have to offer.
Yes.
And
that's a huge part of it. Yes.
They make that step to go, one step up to y'all's place. So.
Yeah, you talked about creating community earlier. You're kind of creating community by joining theirs and asking them to kind of slowly transition to yours. Yeah, it's fascinating. What is your personal background, Devon? You've said a couple of times when you came back to Rome. Sure. This has to be a passionate pursuit to dedicate your life to this. So, what's your background?
So I went to Warren Wilson College in Western North Carolina. It has a really distinct educational model. Everybody does their education. Everybody works on campus. It's 100% a work college. Berea and other work colleges fashioned their programs after Warren Wilson. And then finally, everybody had to do community service. You couldn't graduate if you hadn't met all those criteria. And so I really do know that, and intrinsically, that became a part of who I was in my college experience. Right outside of Asheville, North Carolina. I worked with homeless programs there and other social service programs in that community. I was called to ministry at 17, but I'm female in the South and didn't have a lot of models for what that might look like. There weren't a lot of girl preachers running around when I was moving through that. So I went to Duke Divinity in 2012 and graduated with my degree from there in 2015. And I am in the process of being ordained in the Episcopal Church as clergy. I'll be a deacon in the Episcopal tradition. And so what I do is social work, but it is my calling and my ministry. And I've done it ministry and social work for 20 years, side by side. I'm married to a Roman. His great-grandparents were here, and so we're raising the 5th generation of his family here in town. So.
Good. Yeah, I could, when people do what you do, it's not a job. It's a passion. It's a calling. And so thank you for that. And thank you for what you do for the Rome, Floyd area. What is contact information? The website is daviesshelter.com, correct? That's 2 S's.
That's correct. 2 S's in the middle.
And
we are on Facebook as The Shelter, which is our men's program, and the Ruth and Naomi House, which is our women's program.
And how can people get involved, support through donations, dollars, time? What do you need?
All the above. But we would love to chat with people. We are grateful recipients of the Bonner program from Berry College. We have 12 college students that work with us during the school year. If you've got an idea for how you want to be with us, call us. There's probably not a bad idea out there. You can reach me at 706-802-6300. That's my office number. And if I'm not sitting here, somebody will answer and get the word to me. But yeah, we just encourage folks to come and be a part of the community we are working with, because it begins to drop away some of the stereotypes, and we begin to be neighbors. We begin to be us and not me and them. And so we encourage that.
Well, thank you, Devon. Jimmy, any final thoughts?
No, I mean, what Devon and her group does, so many of the times we just drive by these folks and just don't want to get involved and don't want to, you acknowledge them, but, for them to actually acknowledge them and reach out to them, that's pretty special. Sometimes we have a habit of just, I'll just drive on by. I won't think about that today, but it's pretty special what they do.
Thank you.
Well, thank both of you for joining us. Devon, thank you for all that you do in the community. Jimmy, of course, thank you for all that you do in the community there at Hardy Realty. I'm Roger Manus. You've been listening to the Hardy Realty Show here on Rome Business Radio from the Hardy Realty Studios, and we work in cooperation with the Rome News Tribune. Thanks for listening.